I'm here with Gordon A. Martin Jr., the author of Count Them One by One, Black Mississippians Fighting for the Right to Vote. Welcome to Jackson.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the significance of this book. It's about a court case in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, but what was significant about that case?
This was the first big case that the United States Department of Justice brought in the state of Mississippi. It was a major undertaking. Hattiesburg, the county seat of Forest County, permitted only 12 out of 7,500 registered or would-be registered voters of the African American race to vote.
Only 12
Only
out
12
of 7,500
on the county as a whole.
Mm.
And we had to do something about that.
Mm-hmm.
At that point, though, we were operating on a county-by-county basis. And I think one of the things that we learned from the Forest County case was just how slow it would be. It went on for years despite the best efforts of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit, which entered an order right after our first trial in March of 1962.
Okay.
And this case, Steve, led directly to the passage of the Voting Rights Act in 1965. We needed something radical to deal with the disfranchisement of blacks in the South. The Voting Rights Act took the power to discriminate away from the covered states under the statute, and really by the end of 1965, the act having been passed in August, there was a significant increase, and by the end of the decade, blacks were voting basically in the same way that whites did.
Excellent. Let's give people some nitty-gritty about how the case went. When someone is denied their voting rights, what office in a county is the one usually making that denial? Who were you essentially targeting as the criminal?
The 82 counties of Mississippi each had a circuit clerk who also served as the registrar of voters.
Mm.
And that person, for a black person, along with the chief of police, was probably the most important person. They represented government, and government at that point was hostile to any form of black rights.
Well, you said there were only 12 registered. What kinds of things would happen to keep them from registering? What sorts of things happened in that office?
Really, the arbitrary denial of the franchise to blacks. The literacy test wasn't even enforced until 1961 for white people. They just walked in, signed the book, there they were.
Okay.
There they were. And black people weren't permitted to take the test until about that same period of time. When they took the test, they would be given the most difficult sections of the Mississippi Constitution to interpret. 16th section lands being one, conflict of interest, and a white person, if required, might get something short like Section 30. There shall be no imprisonment for debt.
And facing all that, did many of the black citizens in Forest County and elsewhere just give up? Is that one of the reasons there were so few registered?
Some gave up, but others persisted. Richard Boyd went to the circuit clerk's office 50 times. Finally got registered, ultimately.
Mm.
After the order was issued for the Fifth Circuit, and Registrar Lynd had been ordered not to discriminate, then the pastor of Mount Carmel Missionary Baptist Church, James Chandler, was the first of our witnesses to be registered by Theron Lynd. It took him 9 times after the order that Lynd not discriminate.
Oh my goodness. So now you came to Forest County and gathered together black witnesses who had been discriminated against, who had been denied the right by Theron Lynd. What kinds of obstacles did someone face in becoming a witness in this case? Were there intimidations that they were going to face? Were they secure in their job if they were going to testify for you?
That was certainly a major fear, and at Hercules Powder Company, then the principal employer in the city of Hattiesburg, fortunately there was a union shop steward, Huck Dunnigan, who told his black workers that he would make sure that their attempting to register would not cost them their jobs. And Huck Dunnigan delivered.
Wow.
And the workers of the Hercules Powder Company were a major factor in our group of witnesses.
And Powder Company, what did they make? Did they make black powder or explosives, or what was it?
That's the way they started. It was a spin-off from DuPont back at the beginning of the 20th century.
Okay.
And they went into other things, in the Piney Woods area, local products in addition to gunpowder.
Okay. So now, were all of your witnesses of that working class, or were there a range of witnesses within the African American community?
There were, and we had 5 teachers from the Hattiesburg Public Schools, all of them Mississippians who would have preferred to have their graduate education in the state of Mississippi, but there was none available to them at that point, so they went elsewhere. And they had achieved master's degrees at New York University, Cornell, Columbia, Oregon State, West Virginia, the University of Wisconsin, and it didn't make any difference. They were still considered illiterate.
And denied the right to vote.
Despite being qualified to teach the children of the state of Mississippi, at least the black children.
Now, your case relied not only on the testimony of African American witnesses, but you also sought out white witnesses.
We did.
What was the purpose in doing that?
We wanted to present that contrast between what happened when a black went in and what happened when a white person went in. And so we, without any records, went to the library and found out which classes of Hattiesburg High School would have applied to register to vote in that 2.5-year time period before our trial, because that was what we were restricted to.
Just the 2.5 years?
Yeah,
okay.
And we figured out who likely would have reached 21 and gone to register, and we presented an equal number of white witnesses that emerged after the FBI interviewed a whole batch of them.
Now, you were there for what Mississippians of the day might have called the Kennedy Justice Department, or they would have certainly attached you to what they saw was a liberal Catholic president, right?
Well, yeah, except that civil rights had not been a priority for President Kennedy as a legislator, and he was slow in coming to it as chief executive. But he did, and the goal of the Kennedy administration was to provide the right to vote to blacks on the basic, solid, pragmatic view that once black people could vote, politicians would pay attention to them.
Right. But when you approached a white family in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, and said, "I want you to testify," or "I want your son to testify in this trial," what were the reactions that you received?
Well, it varied, but they respected the subpoena and they showed up.
Oh, good.
That first trial was in Jackson. It wasn't actually held in Hattiesburg.
Oh, okay.
But they went to Jackson and testified here.
Okay. And these years of the trial, again, this was 62?
The first big trial was in March of 62.
Okay.
There in Lynd, violating the order, immediately had to have a contempt trial in September of 1962, and different proceedings went on thereafter for 3 more years.
Okay. Now, you began to think about writing this book at what point in your life? What did you do after being a U.S. Attorney? Where did you move on from there?
Well, I came back to Boston and became first assistant United States attorney for the District of Massachusetts.
Okay.
I later became a commissioner of the Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, and then started a small law firm, and Martin, Morse, Wiley, and Kaplan for 11 years. I was appointed a judge of the Massachusetts Trial Court by Governor Michael Dukakis in 1983, and it was actually about 5 years later than that I began thinking back to my witnesses in Forest County.
Okay.
I was taking a seminar at New York University, and all the academics in it had a project, and I thought, I know what my project is going to be, finding my witnesses in United States versus Thayer and Lynd.
Now, when you came to them, were they glad to talk about it, glad to remember it?
Oh, they were. They were. They realized how their lives had changed as a result of the end of that kind of discrimination. And Willie Thigpen had the most memorable statement, as I recall. He said, "Oh, was it worth it? Of course it was worth it. Now I go into a store. The white man comes in, but I don't have to give up my place. I take my place in line just like anybody else. And when I get up to the counter, they don't call me boy anymore. They call me Mr. Thigpen."
And when they came back together in Hattiesburg, when you were just down there for the signing, several descendants of the witnesses were there.
Children,
What was the
grandchildren,
atmosphere?
nieces, nephews. There was a big reunion, a happy reunion of a lot of people who had not been in touch with one another, and they were glad to see each other and catch up on what other people were doing and rejoice at what their parents had done.
Now, in one of your final chapters, you talk really about Mississippi today, because you bring all of the witnesses' stories up to date. You don't just leave us back in 1962. You take it through the things that happened to them and later. In that chapter about Mississippi today, what was your general assessment of how far we've come? I mean, we've heard from your voice, from Mr. Thigpen, about some very good things that have happened. Well, where are we now in Mississippi with regard to civil rights and equal rights?
I think there's been tremendous progress. It's a different world than it was when I was here in the 1960s, and I was delighted to have the privilege of teaching civil rights at Ole Miss Law School in the year 2000. I think that there still is some difficulty at the top echelon of economics in the state, the power structure of the state. I don't think there are as many African Americans there as ideally would be the case, but you see the political advancement in Hattiesburg and Jackson, and I think the state can be very proud of what it has accomplished without being so proud of that it doesn't do a lot of introspection too.
Good. Well, thanks so much for spending time with us. We've been talking with Gordon A. Martin, Jr., the author of Count Them One by One, Black Mississippians Fighting for the Right to Vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.